Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, I want to let you know about my free guidebook called Music Production Essentials. It's a brief rundown of my top 24 takeaways that I've learned over the course of interviewing so many audio professionals for this podcast. So just go to secretsonics.co and you'll see the image. It's a totally free download, and I hope it helps you with your productions. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 109 with Maor Appelbaum. I had a great chat with Maor. We talked about so many things, including moving to the States, working with Sylvia Massy, working on a wide array of genres, his approach to mastering and getting emotion out of a record. We had an inside look at some of his gear, being a part of the audio community, getting on the phone with clients, and so much more. So I think you're going to love this conversation. So with all that to say, here's my conversation with Maor Appelbaum here on Secret Sonics. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Maor Appelbaum. Maor is a mastering engineer based in Los Angeles who has worked with the likes of Yes, Faith No More, Dream Theater, Meatloaf, Eric Gales, Walter Trout, William Shatner, Annihilator, Sabaton, Starset, and many, many others. Maor and I connected on Facebook a while back, and he's graciously agreed to join me on the air. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Maor.
Hi, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny. We kind of have inverse stories in the sense that I grew up in the States and moved to Israel, have spent most of my, music career here. And you kind of did the reverse. You grew up here in Israel and went to America, and, your whole career is based there, basically. So tell me a little bit about your story. Like, how did that happen? And then, I guess, how did that turn into mastering?
I moved to America when I was around 32. And I just wanted to make not a career change, as a change of the whole picture of like being in a different place, starting fresh again, starting from kind of the beginning, because I wanted to work my way up again. And I was making a living in Israel, working in broadcasting and DJing, and I did some, live stuff, just a lot of stuff in audio, including mastering. But I really wanted to change where I was in terms of professionally. Like, I wanted to focus on mastering, but I was doing a lot of broadcasting back then. That was my day gig. And I wanted to move to America to try something else, and I didn't start for mastering in the States, but I got a gig, if you call it, or a job, or whatever you want to call it. I contacted Sylvia Massy because she had worked with a band that I was mastering at the time. And I figured, well, you know what? It might be a good idea to maybe check if I can come there for the summer. And we talked. And she said to me, why don't you come and work here? Do the mastering and all that, and other stuff in the studio if you want. And I was like, okay, that's possible. And I was still working in that broadcasting studio. And then when they decided to close the project after 7 years, I was like, well, they're closing the project. Now it's not just going for the summer. Now I can actually go for whatever time it takes and do it. And it was kind of on a wing and a prayer, if you want to call it that way, very, very literally.
Yeah.
So in the summer, I turned 32 and I left to the States, and I went to work for Sylvia Massy up in Weed, California, in Radio Star Studios. And I was doing various things there. I did some mastering for some stuff from there or outside the place. I did some mixing and mix assistant. I did some tracking, some assisting for tracking, and some maintenance, just being part of the studio staff. And, you get exposed to gear, you get exposed to music and how things are going there. And you meet people, you make connections. And we all lived in that studio. So it's kind of a living space and creative space at the same time. And some of the connections and friendships are, we're still friends, a lot of people I worked with back then.
Yeah. What convinced you, or how were you able to convince Sylvia Massy to bring you over to America? Like, what was that conversation like?
Well, she didn't bring me to America. She offered me, to come and like work like an intern for free, but to be there. And I was like, well, I don't have anything better to do. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, start from the bottom up, like you said.
Yeah, and I didn't mind that. I was 32, and I was at a point where I'm like, maybe I needed to change place, change status, change. You know what I mean? And it just came to that point where, back then when I was in Israel, the music scene there was evolving, but the problem was that there were not enough bands and engineers, producers, and that were of genres that are outside what was at that time. Like today you go there's a bunch of engineers that know how to do things, and there's gear there and all that. But back then it was more limited, and like bands that needed to record music that was not the common music there, they mostly had to go outside Israel to do those recordings. Because then it wasn't as infused with what's today. Today you have forums, you have the Facebook, social media, Facebook is a tool, forums are tools, Instagram, people communicate with sharing files, with collaborating with websites that let you do that. Back then it wasn't existing. So, there was MySpace, okay? But, and you can communicate, with somebody on a certain level, but the forums were not many. Gear was very hard to get. And the knowledge was also not as accessible. You didn't have tutorials like you have today. You didn't have education online on that level. So things have changed in the past decade plus, even less than a decade. But back then, it was really hard to get that information, like knowing what to do, knowing how to do it. There were a lot of great engineers there. A lot of them were really good, but the genres were not as developed there enough for people to have the experience to work on them. Where today, a lot of these people have worked with a lot of bands and developed the skills, and some of them went on touring and got experience. So things have changed big time. Like, and I hear today music coming out from there. I'm like, wow, this is really good.
Yeah, the internet really has, evolved, and everyone's able to listen to everything and be inspired by every genre, and it's all kind of turning into one big mush in a sense. All the genres are kind of combining or borrowing from this and that. And also, like you were saying about education, like I got started about a decade ago, and even when I got started, it was like gear sluts, you know what I mean? And nothing compared to what's available now. And Gear Sluts is like, okay, if you go on Gear Sluts, you're probably going to get like, there's a lot of angry people that are just going to give you a hard time for even getting started. It's not a very good place I think, to get started. And there's nothing like having a mentorship with somebody. And Sylvia Massy sounds like one of the best people to get a mentorship with. What was that like?
Well, first of all, like you said, with the Gear Sluts and stuff like that, those were, actually the only outlets. And again, you post something and you don't know if you're going to get responded in a positive or negative way, and eaten up or beaten up or whatever. But this was, first of all, going to a place with all this amazing gear. The Neve 8038 that she had back then, and all these, Pultecs at Fairchilds, and Gates and Collins, and all these amazing pieces of gear. You're really excited just being near them, the heat coming from the tubes. It's like, oh my God, I'm like super excited. And then, working with a person, who's done all these records and has a history that by itself has, a ton of power to it. It's like you work with somebody that was there during those recordings, who was involved in those recordings, who made a difference. You know what I mean? It has weight to it, and also the staff, the people who work there, being part of that was like, you pick up from people different things. And, the chief engineer that back in that studio back then was Rich Veltrop, and he worked with Sylvia, in LA, and he worked in LA at different studios. And, he's done some records that, and that, oh, you were on that record. Oh, you did this. Wow. And then he tells you how he did this and that. It's like the discussion, you start to be part of hearing about it more and more, and it excites you. You're immersed in that information. Of course, you can't understand it immediately because there's a lot of information there, and also there's the moment of when it happened. You're not at that moment, but you sit with an artist, they're recording, and that artist recorded with another guy and another guy and this guy and this guy, and you're like, oh man, you did this, you were in that band. Oh wow, it starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger on you, and you see how this industry is big, but it's small. Okay, it's huge, but it's in a certain galaxy, but not too expanded. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's big, but then you see the connection, which kind of makes it like a circle or different circles. And it was very interesting. Yeah. And I met a lot of interesting people who've done a lot of cool records or worked for people who've done cool records. So you get immersed with that.
It sounds inspiring. Sounds like an inspiring time in your life,
It was because, first of all, you're in the deep of things. You're in the middle of a production or a mix or something, and then you got to deal with stuff too. You got to learn what to do. You got to figure out what to do, and then there's always these challenges, and you're part of the team now. You're going to have to take those challenges on you too, It was very important. I learned a lot. I experienced a lot. And also it was kind of a sink or swim thing. It's like either you're going to handle it or you're going to leave it, because there was no mattress to drop on or pillow. Although, by the way, I did sleep on a mattress.
I'm sure.
The studio. Yeah, but you get my drift.
People talk about those days, right? The 20-hour days in the studio,
Yeah, but you get my drift. It's the whole thing is that, you make the decision if you want to be there or not. If you take the challenge, if you take the tension, if you can, be part of this. And let's say this, it was intense 8 months of every day, a whole day, as much as possible.
Amazing. So how long after that stint did it take you to become like full-time in mastering?
Well, I was working for her 8 months. And then during that time, I was, doing different things. I did some mastering for different bands, did some mix on some stuff, assisting in recording, sometimes recording, and maintenance work in the studio, some stuff, what I was able to do. Then I moved to LA, and I actually started mastering the moment, I started mastering. I can't say full-time because I was doing another job. I was working at a retail store of music equipment. Gear and all that. I did that for 4 months while I was mastering. I was already mastering some cool stuff, but it was at that time because that helped me get the extra money to buy a car and extra money to pay the rent and extra money to buy some gear. You know what I mean? I did that with another job. And after 4 months of working in retail of selling pro audio gear, I left the job and just focused on mastering.
That's amazing. It sounds like a pretty fast transition. What was it about mastering that, that drew you in? What did you love so much about it?
I think because of my background was, I was a DJ at clubs. I was a music journalist in a few publications. I was a musician by myself and had bands of my own. I had a radio show. I had an online radio show when it was still a new thing. Like I'm talking 2004. And I was a guest DJ in some of also in radio shows. And that background plus the background of sound engineering and broadcasting kind of connected me to the end process, like being the person between the production and the listener, the buffer, which is the mastering. It's like I'm like a fan with control. I'm listening to it like a listener, but I have the ability to make changes, connect the music better with the audience on a sonic level.
That's an interesting way of defining a